The possibility of partnerships that will be created during the Resilient Communities grant term was really exciting at our last session. One of our attendees was curious to hear more about interfaith collaborations and partnerships in general. The question in the chat is if people could tell us what have been meaningful partnerships for you in the past, and do you have any ideas that come to mind for resilient communities? And while you're responding to that, I wanted to turn it over to Juan just to talk a little bit about his experience in a public library working with community partners and the values that partnerships can add.
Yes, thanks, Lainey. Hello, everyone. I think that for me, partnerships bring these great programs because I have different perspectives, and I also have, and I can count on other organizations with their expertise. So, for example, I work on a project about sea level rising and the effect that it's going to have in communities here in Seattle. And then one of my partners is Earth Lab at the University of Washington. And they bring the scientific knowledge that really helped me shape and inform the project. And I also work with the Seattle Public Utilities because they have a lot of initiatives about mitigating sea level rise by instituting, putting things in place in the public utilities that can help the community be aware and create new practices. So for me, that's the biggest value for me of these organizations. The program becomes really rich. I can count on that expertise. So for me also, it's a matter of looking at community in a broader sense, right? So for me, the university here is part of that community. Public utilities is also part of that community. So I always think of reaching out beyond the library walls and even more, even including business partners, right? Think about a community in the broader sense possible.
If folks could share in the chat, if you really have organizations in mind where you already have a contact there versus if you're maybe looking to approach an organization that you haven't worked with before. And while we're waiting to hear ideas from you, Juan, can you say anything just about how you started your first step toward working with one of those partners?
Right. So I think, I was thinking about, right, because it's like, for me, it's going to conferences, going to events, and the way that this project, it's like a virtual reality project that I started to create awareness around sea level rise and environmental and climate change here in Seattle. And it started by me visiting a event that was sponsored by the city of Seattle at a museum over here, and there were some virtual reality vendors there and people involved in that, and I just started talking to somebody. So that led to my first project, and I had an exhibit at the library about the Duwamish River here in Seattle that was like a straighten. It was changed course to just make it more commercial. And then it was an exhibit that was like VR, but also it had many materials at the library in terms of the environmental impact that doing that had in the river and the Seattle and the displacements of the communities. So people came to see it. And so people from the University of Washington came to see it. And then they were interested in doing work with us. So it was just like, it's this thing, I think, for me of like, being out there to putting your ideas out and then having conversations with people. I think that's something, leverage your network. For me, I'm always looking at like, oh, can you introduce me to that person? Or like, with experience, it becomes easier, right? Because sometimes I feel that when I was studying it, it was very scary, intimidating. It was like, how am I going to handle all these many networks? But I think as you do it more, then it becomes easier. But yeah, so I mean, for me, the advice is like, just have conversations and tell people what you do, because I think libraries doing amazing work, and sometimes they don't, you're a little shy of promoting the work, and I think you shouldn't be. Like, just tell people what you're doing because they're going to connect with you very well.
Thank you. Before I move to the next question that we have ready to go, there's a question here from Lori. Just wondering if people have experience working with neighborhood councils. I don't know if any of you do.
I work with the Seattle Housing Authority, right? And then, but not necessarily. I don't think that they're neighborhood councils.
Gotcha. Okay, well, our next question definitely gets at partnerships too. So I'm going to throw this over to Madeline and ask Madeline if you can talk a little bit more about how you engaged.
I have some highlights from the chat, actually.
Oh, please.
Insert from that. We have some folks who are talking about some ideas that I think we'd really love to add to our discussion. We have from Cara Rumble, who says, as far as ideas, I'd love to invest in our community gardens. The slot for the garden always fill up immediately when the annual registration window opens. So I'd love to offer an alternative for those who are unable to gain a garden spot or pay the fee. So that is like an interesting idea. Did anyone of our panelists have like thoughts about that comment?
I think that's a really great idea for a partnership. So much of what we're looking at sustainability is the idea that a lot of food in our country is really wasted, and maybe that's because people don't value food as much, or just how much work it puts into it. And I think it sounds like a great educational way to offer an opportunity to people, but also give them that space and increase the opportunity for people to, again, appreciate how much work it goes into growing stuff. And I think when people start doing that, whether they're doing the gardens at the library space or at home, they become more mindful about their consumption of food and their food waste in general. That's even just from a personal perspective of having a garden in my own home and seeing just how challenging it can be.
Yeah, definitely. And there's like some other folks in the chat who also have some related programs that I'll just highlight really quickly. So part of that partnership that Kara was talking about, also partnering with master gardeners, and also building another one with their Parks and Rec department, which is awesome. Eric Tans talks about partnering with the local food bank and starting a seed library that can also build on that partnership. So I think just, yeah, those ideas of sustainability and food and what we could do is a really popular theme for us to think about in terms of how do we build these resilient communities.
I'd like to jump in as an academic librarian with the gardening concept. We not only have some gardens on campus, but our HSRC, the Human Services Resource Center on our campus, that supports students of need. They have a great garden, they have a food bank, and they have all of this kind of work going on. And they're also do other things to support our community. So not just the students on campus, but actually folks in the community too, and they partner with a lot of groups. So I think there's a lot of town and gown partnerships too, with if you're on an academic campus and you want to connect locally, that there's definitely opportunity and to really encourage people to think beyond just the campus community and connect with some of these local partners, because that'll just grow the resilience in the community even better.
Yeah, I also think that you can, even if a community doesn't have a garden, you can help them develop one, right? Or we did a program over here not long ago where they had a space in this community center, but they needed to clean it up. So we went there as volunteer with social distancing, and then we helped the community clean up the garden, that lot in the back. So we're gonna build a garden now. So there are many possibilities over there. It's a great idea.
I really like that someone in the chat is saying they're working with the Urban Farm Project director to connect. I just hadn't even thought of that. That's a great opportunity. Yeah, finding these connections to get this going.
Yes, and so someone else has also pulled from, this is a Nick Densky, connected with leaders of color from Citizens Climate Lobby, which includes some elected officials. It's really awesome to see just the different ways of, like, when we think about climate change, what are the organizations that are near us that can help us think differently about our collaborations. Really awesome.
I'm going to call out from the chat too. I hope it hasn't already been read out. A comment from Lisa that says, I always like to make sure I come to potential partners with an idea that will support the work they already do. And that's a perfect way to approach new partnerships. Wonderful. Let's see here. I hope we're not missing any questions. I'm going to move on to another one. Asking Madeline to talk a little bit more about her work engaging the LGBTQIA community during your screening with Fire and Flood. For those who may have joined us for the prior webinar, Madeline hosted that film, the screening of that film with her library. So we'd love to hear about your outreach, Madeline.
Sure, yeah, it's so great to be here with you all finally. We think about what this project is and then you all show up. So this is where the rubber hits the road. Yes, so just to give the full title, it's called Fire and Flood, Queer Resilience in the Era of Climate Change. And it's a wonderful documentary. It's on the list of films that you can choose from if you are selected for a grant, or even if you want to show it for other purposes. And by the way, the filmmaker, Vanessa Raditz, is available to potentially Skype in and be part of your discussion. So when we decided to show it at the Science and Engineering Library at UMass Amherst, I reached out right away to the Stonewall Center, which is our campus LGBTQ center. And I would say in general, with all partners, reach out as early as you can and let them know what's on your mind so they are part of the planning process. And it's not like you come to a partner and like, this is what we want to do, and try to, wedge in, what their role might be. So I got in touch with the director really early. We had a phone meeting and they were totally on board from the beginning. And the other thing, if you were to show this film, I was thinking about PFLAG, which you might have a chapter in your community, which is friends, family, allies of LGBTQ people. That might be another idea. And also youth groups. So if you think about local schools, like in a high school, they might have an LGBTQ club, and thinking of these different groups that might be looking for activities to join in with. And like Juan was saying, it really does get easier. After a while, people start coming to me. I, at first, like you said, it was like, oh, you're sort of sensing your way and how to make something happen. And then suddenly over time, also you become known as somebody that cares about climate change issues, and then people are like sending other people to you, and then you can send those people to other people, because the network just grows like in your brain, and then we can all be of greater use because we hold all these amazing pieces. And I think librarians really do this very well, is that we're connectors. So if that's enough of an answer for now.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just to say, Nick from the chat says, I call that in reach. That's where it's at. I love that term. That's perfect. Before we dive too deep, and Beth, I see you noticed this in the chat. We had a question that came in about our last topic just before we jumped in, where Will has asked, so sorry, just lost it. One of our branches also has a community garden that is sometimes used for Share the Harvest program. This garden was originally developed in partnership with other city departments, including our master gardeners and Parks and Rec. But over time, the garden became difficult to maintain as our partners became busy with other projects. Are there any recommendations for how to keep them engaged?
I think that you can, because I think you can add programs to that garden project to create any buzz and interest. Like when we were doing this garden work, we were thinking about having some other workshops that would happen with it. Like some people were writing haiku, so we could have like a haiku workshop at the same time. or creating even things that are really needed right now, or a workshop where you can have social distance, but at the same time create masks, for example, is something that people are really interested in learning how to do. Or you can bring local artists, right? And then you can have something where people will draw or paint on the garden, right? So you can create things around it that might bring other type of audiences to attract them back to the project.
And like I mentioned, I just wanted to put a pull out for the youth. I just feel like bringing in younger people can really help bring in that energy again too and get them excited. They're the future of our communities, so bring them in early.
Yeah, it seems like a really good time to sort of do what Juan was saying, where you create programs around it. I know, again, in times of COVID, a lot of people are favoring moving outside and doing outdoor programming and events, and that's a really good way to highlight the space that you have, saying, you know, we need help here. We're working on this. We're doing this other program, but if anyone needs to help, because you might find people who are interested, they just thought maybe someone else was already invested in it. So it seems like a really ideal time to start collecting other people who might be engaged in reinvigorating that garden space.
Just want to give a quick request for you all to, when you send a question in the chat, if you could make sure you're selecting all panelists and attendees. We just got a Q&A that people are not seeing everything that's coming through, and there's some awesome ideas. So if you could make that designation, that would be terrific. I think I might have interrupted you, Bibi.
Oh, no, all good. I was just going to say, someone, Leroy, also mentioned that connecting the garden to pollinators is a helpful solution as well. To kick things back over to what Madeline, you were just saying with the incredible outreach that you did, I just wanted to shout out what you put in the chat, that someone from Stonewall also spoke at the talkback, which is incredible. For Fire and Flood, the creators are really open to having their presence be at a program as part of, if you choose that film to meet one of the grant requirements. Not only would Vanessa, the creator, be interested, but also people who are actually featured in the film. So being connected to people who you just saw be interviewed could be really, really exciting. So just to highlight that portion again too. I'm going to ask in the chat, just to keep talking about, if other folks had other questions about how to engage with the LGBTQ community in your area, what are some ideas that you all have tried? Or if you haven't done this type of engagement before, or do you have any questions about what it would be like to start that engagement? And this can also apply to other communities that are in your area. Like when you're thinking about these great partnerships that will, like Madeline said, naturally crystallize as part of the Resilient Communities Grant, what are some questions that you have?
And in the meantime, I see a question from Lisa. Has anyone done programming to engage the Hispanic community? Who did you reach out to? What ideas worked?
I love the Hispanic community, you know. So I work with, so the way that I've engaged with them is through, I know that a branch is located at an area where there's a lot of Hispanics there, and then they come naturally to the library. So I work with that branch librarian to connect with that community, and from there it has expanded. So she first introduced me to one organization, and then I work with another one, but she's always that connector that Madeline was talking about, right? So for me, it helps. I'm sorry, it helps that I speak Spanish, so that's a good plus, right? But also really listening to them. I usually go to their meetings just to introduce myself. I never come with like an ask in the beginning. It's more about like, how can I help? Let's see, I want to know what you're doing and see how that will, then how I can support you in the efforts that you have going on.
There was also, when I worked in Colorado, in rural Colorado for a long time, there was a lot of migrant Spanish-speaking workers in the community, and we tried to work with them, with the libraries around there, by going to places where, yeah, I was in the San Luis Valley. For the person that said they're in rural Colorado, I worked a lot in the San Luis Valley there. And there was one place that everyone went to hang out and eat, and we just like went there and hung out there. And I know a little bit of Spanish, but un poquito. But I definitely think listening and kind of being where they are and sharing, finding out what the needs are, bringing some library books to them there and back, and then saying there's more. It just was a really good, beneficial thing to kind of go to where people are, and not expecting them to come to you, and making the connections that way.
I was going to interject, not my library per se, but one of the libraries in my system has a pretty sizable Hispanic population. And one of the ways they were successful at reaching them was by going to the local community college and checking out the ESL classes and doing some outreach that way. And then they started a program of just an English language learners informal conversation group as a program at their library, and sort of just started offering that space. And then from there was sort of able to make inroads of working with that group. But again, sort of just giving them space, reaching them through the ESL groups. And yeah, instead of starting with an ask, just being like, this is something you can have if you'd like it, if you'd be interested. And it worked. They were successful at reaching the Hispanic population in their town, just a town over from us in Berryville, that way.
Can I say something else? I also think that sometimes you don't need to know Spanish, but it helps, like I said, or you don't need to be Hispanic, but understanding their culture, it's really important. For example, understanding that for many Latinos, the library space can be intimidating, and then they don't see it as their space, that it's more a space for other folks, other people, right? And understanding that you can help them understand that that's a place for them as well. It's really important, open and creating that open network that they can feel that this space belongs to them.
Yes, as Lisa notes from the chat, intimidation is what they're trying to overcome as well. And some of these great ideas also coming from the chat. Carol has volunteered with the Latinx 4-H Club, which is really great because it's whole families, youth, all ages, and parents too. And I think that also like echoes this idea of like, go to where the people are, go hang out, like talk to folks. If you don't know where the community is, it's like, hey, hi, how are you? And show genuine interest.
Yep,
Oh,
go ahead, Bibi. There's a question in the Q&A from Leroy. The question is, we have a good sized elderly population in our community. They love the library, but traditionally have had difficulty engaging in programming not held at the senior center. Does anyone have ideas on connecting with COVID, something that we're all struggling with? Does anyone have a response for that?
I am not responsible for the program directly, but we have an older adults program at the Seattle Public Library that just started. If you want to know more, I can put you in contact with the program manager that is responsible, but we're doing a lot of art programs with older adults that seems to connect them a little bit more. And also some work with Capital One to create some financial literacy programs also that are helping them, and seems to be very popular with them.
It sounds like there's definitely concern or questions about, since we're all doing so much virtual, like how do you connect, like are there going to be difficulties in, like Madeline mentioned, being welcoming is one thing to talk about in a virtual space, but also thinking about people that might struggle to get into a virtual space, like they can't even, they struggle whether it's a tech thing or internet, don't even have a connection to get into something like Zoom. So what other options are available for them? And you know, with some of these, it's going to be thinking creatively. I'm was researching the virtual book club reads, but there's options, like there's some libraries that are doing book clubs over the phone where you're just kind of texting. So there's an website you could go to and just post questions and then answer later. So it doesn't have to be the high level of intensity of something like Zoom if you're in especially a rural community or doesn't have that infrastructure. Thinking about other ways could meet. Some people could, even if there's a great place outside where you can sit distance, maybe in a big garden with an overhang, they could meet in that way too. So kind of trying to think creatively. But I do think it's really important when you're in these, we alluded to it a bit last week, and but making guidelines, having some sort of group agreements and sort of setting those out front will really help people to sort of feel more comfortable in the space, and also somebody that can be helping with, I see in the
Very
chat too,
cool.
tech tips.
And also from the chat, they have at the Black National Convention last week, every speaker described themselves physically before speaking for anyone who may have been blind or low vision in the virtual. Really awesome. And thinking about that access.
That's really cool. I haven't heard that before. I have been impressed by having other, besides, I always think of different language interpreters for, you know, if you're talking to a Spanish speaking community, but also I've seen ASL a lot more too, which I've really, American Sign Language interpreters too, which I really have appreciated in recent sessions.
I just wanted to jump in just because being in a rural area, and also in an area where 40% of our county does not have access to high-speed internet, we've had to get really creative with how we deliver programs. I know our book club is made up of mostly retired folks, and if you have the space outside, that's great. If not, maybe you can help facilitate connections for groups to meet, such as our book club is now meeting at our cemetery, which sounds maybe strange, but it's a beautiful place. It's the only flat space here in Eureka Springs. It's where kids go to ride their bikes, and now where our book club meets, because it's nice and shady. So there's ideas with that. If you can't offer programming at your library, maybe you can help facilitate an outside space and make that connection for them. In terms of other sorts of programming, we have been doing a lot of take and make things, or circulating kits, you know, and you could use funding to create kits that teach lessons and have ideas in them, and you don't have to create it yourself. There's lots of resources you can find too that already have lesson plans in them. Mobility, I saw in Conway, is an issue, definitely an issue here too. One of the ways we were able to work with that is we don't have the staff to offer delivery of items, but one of the churches here in town, the Methodist Church, they had a core group of volunteers that was delivering meals, and they wanted to do more, and they just weren't even having enough people who wanted meals. So we worked with them, and now they're delivering library materials to people who want them as well. Because again, they had enough volunteers, they had enough people who wanted to help, and they were happy to do that for us. So that's worked really well for us. So again, it's sort of just maybe sort of tapping into resources and partnerships that are already there and seeing how y'all can help each other. In this case, with the delivery, I feel like they're really helping us a lot, but I think the people who are volunteering, we're helping them in a way because they want to be of use in this really hard time. And so we were helping them sort of put forth that effort and that positive energy and make use of their time.
Yes, Carol from the chat says a student group on our campus has been delivering ingredients and doing a cooking show on Twitch every other week, which is awesome. And another point that I wanted to add from the chat is someone had mentioned earlier that their library works with the local NAACP chapter a lot, which doesn't do a ton around climate, but the national NAACP has a strong environmental justice program, and the director seems to get paid for her to go and speak in communities and chapters that are within so many miles of a coal plant. So if that's something, that's also another way to do some culturally responsive engagement, and just thinking more creatively about what are these big organizations doing that we can tap into.
I think this is a chat question for April. Oop. That's just asking if you have people sign a waiver for privacy reasons for the delivery of library materials.
So I was just typing, but it's faster to say. We don't have them sign a waiver, but what we do is we use, we get deliveries all the time. We use one of those boxes, put the items in that box, seal it, put the recipient's name and phone number, address, if they have, because we live in a rural area, any tricky county roads to get to, we get that info from the patron and include that for the driver. And all the driver knows is that they're delivering library materials, and that's all. They don't see what's in it, it's sealed, and it works out pretty well that way.
Ooh, Madeline, could you jump in and say more about this temporary labyrinth that you're making?
I was hoping you'd ask. Yes. So we are going to do it either with chalk on like a big open asphalt area. Another idea, we might do both, is you can use what's called groundskeeper tape, which is like a thick tape, and then you anchor it with these metal kind of turf clips, and you can make the pattern on a mown lawn. And until the grass grows back, you can invite people to walk it. And I love labyrinths. So besides stress reduction, relaxation, they actually can be thought of as like a metaphor for like the journey of life and uncertainty that we're all experiencing right now. There's a lot of neuroscience around how it helps you to like you can make a decision or ask a question and walk in the labyrinth. I'm really available if anybody wants to email me offline and talk more. And I will say you can do it without any kind of training, but I did just finish a week-long facilitator training with a group called Veriditas. So I've been learning a lot about designs of labyrinths. And there are styles called processional, where you start on one end and you wind through and go out the other end, so that you never, for social distancing, in this case, you never pass by another person, you just go straight through. And I just think people are going to love it, and it would be really cool for families to come to the library parking lot and walk the labyrinth. So I'm just planting a seed.
I love it too. I hope I'm just going to quickly check for questions before I go on to the next one that was sort of preloaded here. Okay. So we're just calling, and I should say too that all of our advisors, Madeline as well as the other 3 advisors, have really generously agreed to sort of be available for personal consultation as you might want to connect with them if you're preparing an application. So you can feel free to, just for ease of a single email, send a message to publicprograms@ala.org. We would be happy to connect you. Or of course you can use the email directly shared in the chat. Our next question, we're just inviting both academic and public libraries to be part of this project. And so we're just interested to hear what type of library you represent and what it is about this project that you feel like is a great opportunity that you would want to bring as a member of the cohort. And while people are thinking about that and contributing through chat, I want to rewind to 2 comments, and try to link them together from the chat. We had something in the thread, someone from Arizona who is dealing with wildfires, and I wanted to find that question and read it off and then connect it with crew. So from Leroy, I worked for a library in Arizona where wildfires are becoming more frequent with increased drought. We partnered with Regional Emergency Response to help local community organizations be integrated into disaster response with the library as a communications hub. It's fantastic. think there's a little bit of a connection to Crew, which I know Madeline has worked with Crew directly. Do you have anything to add to that, or just to sort of give people a better idea of what working with Crew as part of the project will be like?
Sure, yeah. Crew is Communities Responding to Extreme Weather, and they're based in Boston. And I've been connecting with them through the Massachusetts library system. So it's really exciting because they're about to expand through this grant. And when you are selected as a grantee, you will become a certified Crew Resilience Hub. And what that means at the very least is that you're offering extreme weather information to your community, and you agree to do one event a year, one program. But beyond that, there's other levels that you could do as a hub. You could provide charging stations for devices. You could be offering food and water. You could do medical supplies, and the most, largest contribution would be actually sheltering people. So you have to obviously work out with your library, with your community, what makes sense. I'm really excited about this idea of libraries as a network of resiliency hubs. I don't know of such a hub or such a network that even exists outside of libraries. Is I think unique to the country, that we're going to sort of be leading the way as a connected group that's making spaces that are safe and welcoming. And I mean, there's already tons of on the ground examples of libraries as first, what's that word? Not first responders, but first, I'm blanking on the word. Do you know what I mean? Like, well, helping a post-disaster. So I'll think of it in a moment. So it is a really exciting, and yes, I do think that wildfires are extreme weather incidences. I don't know if everybody agrees, but I think that fits right into the category. And what's also exciting about this grant is that there's going to be like a wide geographic distribution. So as a cohort, the librarians that are leading these 25 grants, you're going to be connected across different kinds of climates. Some of us are coastal, some of us are warm, cold. It's really going to kind of open our eyes to each other's specific needs and the way that we work with our communities. So I hope I answered that question, and I'm also available to talk more about that, the hubs piece.
I'm going to read a quick response from Eric and then turn it over to April for her thoughts. Eric says, I'm at an academic library, but I think that this opportunity fits really well with our land grant mission. We already provide services to the community, and the campus is a hub for community activity and education, so it makes sense. Plus, we have pre-existing relationships with community organizations that we will partner with on this proposal. I love that response. April, would you share just a little bit about why public libraries in this grant, your thoughts on that?
Yes. I mean, broadly, I think libraries have always been really great at bringing together everyone. I love this saying about the best, and sometimes, depending on your feelings, the worst thing about public libraries is that they're for absolutely everyone. You get everyone coming through the doors. Specifically for this grant, I think that libraries and their neutrality is very a great opportunity for this grant. Coming again from a southern state that can be very conservative, I think that public libraries are a good fit because we can educate without trying to, I don't know, I'm trying to think about how to phrase this. I think there's some resistance. Unfortunately, I think climate change has become politicized, and I do not believe that it should be. I think it affects everyone regardless of your political affiliations. And in some of my partnerships, we partner with our farmers market, and I've spoken to a lot of the farmers who have a lot of the same ideas about resiliency and sustainability as I do, but sort of back off from the idea of climate change, not because they're against it, just because it seems like it's been championed by the left and they don't identify with that. So I think libraries being a neutral space and a community-centered space is a really great way to talk to people and sort of remove that political bias from it. You can also you're focusing on education and the science behind it in many ways. So that's where I think the true value of libraries working on this Resilient Communities grant and climate change and sustainability, why it's a really good fit.
Gonna read off two more from the chat. Beth says we're a public library in central West Virginia. We are very rural and we have an ever-growing, yay, impact on and in our community. We think it could bring partnerships and lots of different ways of looking at the issue. And let's see here, Atlas. We are a public library and have increased interest from our community on programming and events related to sustainability. This grant would be a great opportunity for us to build partnerships and provide more expert information to those seeking to learn more. Let's see here. Did Madeline or Beth, do you want to say anything about the role of academic libraries in the cohort and in working on the project?
Sure. I know it seems like it's very public library heavy here, but I think public and academic libraries could really work well together is one thing to think about. Besides other partners, besides libraries, I've worked, when I was a school librarian, I worked with my public library next door as an academic librarian. At my last place, we ran a film and discussion series with, you know, the local public library and others in the community. I just think you can really pull in that. I really want to go back to what Eric said about being a land grant. OSU, Oregon State is also a land grant, and just those that are, not even if you're not, but academic libraries that are land grant, our mission is to serve those citizens of the state. So we have a very similar mission to public libraries too. So just keep that in mind. There's great connections around your campus as well as the community. I was thinking someone earlier mentioned science communication, and I think that's a really good avenue to take too, is science seems so scary and like out there in tech and things people can't understand. Like, I don't understand that stuff, but science communicators are there to help communicate that to people in the community. They're great people to partner with. You have them on your campus and connect with to help get the word out as well. So there's a lot of different things you can do. I want to mention specifically the students, since you're on a campus and students, I don't know the statistic, but in the book I was just reading, really good book, by the way, that I'm going to recommend for a book read, she was talking about how, I mean, this generation, they are caring about this more than ever before, and they'd have to, it's in their faces a little more. So I think reaching out to the youth group connections, the Sunrise Movement, if you've heard of that, we have a strong Sunrise Movement in our community and on our campus. They actually try to come to some campus events, because I'm on a faculty senate committee for going carbon neutral on campus, and they've actually come to our meetings and want to help get involved. So I think them, Sustain US is another one, sustainus.org is another social, it's both climate and injustices. So anyway, just a few things that I thought were worth mentioning. Find out what's happening on your campus and community, and they're great ways to naturally connect and bring in that youth energy as well.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add, just that you have a built-in audience. Just if you can identify all the courses on your campus that either already are considered sustainability or that you would note them as such, and reach out to those faculty. They could, you know, give extra credit for students to show up and write up as part of a paper. I mean, we have a lot of students showing up to our sustainability stuff because they were assigned to come, or they are writing papers, or they're reporting for a student publication. So definitely, you know, connect with faculty. And if your campus has like a sustainability faculty program, like ours has a fellowship, every year we have 10 professors that are given a stipend to work on curriculum in the sustainability in the curriculum. That's an idea. So yeah, just really tapping into like very almost transdisciplinary approach to what sustainability means.
I'm going to call out quickly a question from Lindsay. If we partner with a local collective, can we establish a resilience hub central to them? And what communication would be possible for them with crew?
Yeah, I saw that, Lindsay. That's a good question. I think it's going to maybe be a case-by-case basis how far crew can stretch beyond this grant. I mean, they're committing to 25 library hubs at this point. I think ideally they would love to just have more and more hubs, but I think it would be something you'd have to kind of work through with them. But I know it's not just libraries that are becoming hubs, it's community centers, it's houses of worship, it's there's another couple of categories that they've seen people signing up. So I think it would be a matter of seeing what they were able to partner with at this point. Definitely ask.
I can also add that in terms of just the web-based training and support that Crew will provide to the cohort, they have indicated that the libraries that are part of the project will be welcome to invite their community partners to join with them. So there will at least be some space to spread your learning and the support from Crew to others beyond the library. We've got about 10 minutes left, so please keep any questions for advisors coming. And I'm gonna take a look at chat here.
Yeah, I'd like to take a moment and shout out something that Will mentioned earlier. Will says, our library is located in Southampton Roads, where sea levels are expected to rise by 5 feet in the next 80 years. Most of our communities are designated special flood hazard areas where storms can surge between 111 to 159 miles per hour. One of these areas is South Norfolk, home to 2 of our library branches. South Norfolk houses 20% of our city's Black population, 40% of which live at or below the poverty line. Within its neighborhoods, the sewage is not only old and ineffective, but contaminated. High levels of petroleum have damaged the surrounding soil, further limiting access to healthy, sustainable foods. We believe that this project will help reduce barriers to learning about climate change with South Norfolk, as well as the surrounding community, and combat the crisis through local partnerships. I think that line really want to highlight, combating the crisis of local partnerships. And I would love to hear from some of the advisors about, yeah, just responding to, you know, this idea of we have areas of really complicated situations, but learning about them and then where libraries can come in to combat that.
Well, I just have to say, I happen to know, Will, about Mothers Out Front in your town. And that's a group that I'm very involved with. I helped to start the chapter in my town out here in Massachusetts. And that just made me think also, you know, like families. And, you know, this really strikes at, you know, people's hearts around protectiveness. So that might be a group that you want to reach out to specifically.
So I have also one thought that climate change and science and sea level rise, for example, and all that scientific information can be very difficult or complex for people to really understand. And I think that libraries in this project can help be the translator, if you will, between these concepts to a public that might not handle scientific concepts so well, right? Because I see myself talking about sea level rise and trying to change the language in a way that is understandable to a very wide audience and not just the scientific community. So I think that role of the library can be really critical and useful as well.
I just wanted to say something really quickly. I remember the last webinar, there was a question about getting information about how climate change will affect your particular area of the community. And it sounds like many of you are well versed with the concerns of your area. But if you want to know more, we brought in a leader from the Climate Reality Group, a scientist who came and spoke about our region's specific concerns and what challenges we're facing here. And I think that really helps to connect people with the idea of what specifically, because I know we want to think globally, act locally, but you can also think locally about how it's going to affect your community and make it a little bit more relatable for them. Not scary, and that was great too. She was really wonderful about talking about, like, these are the challenges, but here is where there is some hope, and here's what you can do. So some ideas about how your community can work together to be more prepared and be a more resilient community. So you can always, I think, do a Google search for the Climate Reality Group, and they will send out a volunteer to come and host a program, and again, talk about those things, and it's free. So that's also very helpful.
I see Madeline has already commented in the chat, but I wanted to read off a question from Nick. I'm in Racine, and I think a librarian friend of mine in Milwaukee, 45 minutes away, will also be applying for this. Typically, she and I collaborate on things, and I'm not crazy about basically having our two libraries be in competition around this. Is there a way any of you all can imagine that we could collaborate that far across communities rather than compete? Madeline has responded to say, you know, on the question of collaborating, virtual engagement makes all of this possible for us and for who will eventually be named as peer reviewers for the project in the Public Programs Office. It's tough. We do consider geographic distribution when we're making grants. And it is tough when there are libraries that are even closer together than 45 minutes that are in competition with each other. If you can find a way for one library to take the lead on an application, that would be terrific, working in partnership. With that said, if you have the bandwidth to each develop independent applications and reference the work of the other library and sort of address that in your proposal, that you know, you could have twice the impact if both libraries got the grant, but that you have a plan for working together if only one library is selected. Those are two different ways to do it. We never know what kind of a response we're going to get. Right now we have 3 proposals on file for this and 25 grants to make, and just really no good way of predicting how competitive the pool will be. That's a real concern, I get it. I hope I'm not missing any questions in the chat. For our last 5 minutes, we do have one more question that I can throw out direct to Beth and invite anyone else to jump in. So many inspiring youth activists are deeply and visibly involved in the fight for climate action and justice. How might your library create opportunities for young people in your community to contribute, collaborate, and lead? Beth, you want to say some things about that? Yeah.
Sure. I mentioned a couple things before, but I really want to pull that out again. So I'm going to advertise this book again. This book, just because I'm just finished reading it last week, but it also was written specifically from a professor that teaches college students, and has been trying for years to teach them about environmental climate change and all of that situation, and just the depression and the lack of just feeling like they can't do anything, and just kind of that whole, it's called a field guide to climate anxiety. And I just think it's a great one for all of us really, but especially for the youth. It really helped me to kind of get a feel for where our youth of today might be thinking and some things that they can do and how they really need to have some direction and desire. And the fact that she said to them, can you imagine what a world might look like that's not dealing with this climate injustices, and they couldn't, is a scary place to be. So I think talking from a college perspective, talking to your students and the students on campus and connecting in that way, but as a library in general, in the public, again, reaching out to the youth, and maybe even a book club or something that's just with the youth group, with younger people, but connecting with groups that are in your community already. Like I was mentioning before, the Sunrise Movement is in a lot of places. Someone else mentioned a couple others in the chat, I can't remember now. We'll have the chat saved to look at, but I think those groups that are engaged and want to make change, listening to them and respecting some of what they have to say might be a way to bring to the future. Is there anything anyone else on my team wants to say? Because I know we're getting down on time.
I was just going to mention that if you don't have a Sunrise group in your area, because I think the closest one is actually where Lindsay's at in Fayetteville, even just looking to the local high school, our local high school has an environmental club, and so we've worked with them. Trying to get one of them to work on our teen advisory board, to have a little bit of say. It's just really, about uplifting them and empowering them a little bit. We've helped them write petitions. We've helped them, we had sort of a program where they came and did their little climate change posters for Earth Day the year before, or some of the many different protests that are going on. So yeah, there's ways to reach out to formal groups, but if you feel like you're from a smaller place and those formal groups don't have a local chapter, you can work with even smaller scale, talk to the local schools, because a lot of them already have these clubs, because kids are inspired and they want to be empowered, and they really benefit from having someone with a little bit more organizational knowledge give them a little bit of input and just let them grow.
And I would just add, I referenced Joanna Macy in the chat, but if you go to the website, Work That Reconnects, this is now an international movement. All the information on it is open source. You just need to credit them. And it really offers so many ways for yourself and also to work in your community around what some people might call ecological grief. And it is real. But facing it, there's a lot of evidence now. It's like if you just kind of keep pushing it away, we can't work through and then do the actions that we know are needed. So thank you, Beth, for putting that in. Yes. Joanna Macy is still alive. She's about 90 years old, and she has inspired people around the world for about 50 years.
We've got just about 1 minute left. I wanted to take a minute to thank everyone for being with us today and sending your questions and just being part of the last hour with us. A reminder that information about the grant is at ala.org/resilientcommunities, and applications are due by September 8th. I wanted to share that ALA, all of our staff will be out. ALA is closed for furloughs during the week of August 17th. So if you could just keep that week in mind, we will be looking for your responses and getting back to them on the 24th when we reopen. Another reminder to please reach out to our fantastic advisors as questions occur to you. For those who need to take off right at the top of the hour, that would be great. But to close us out, Bibi had the fabulous idea of just asking our advisors to each just share maybe 2 sentences, something really brief about why you love this project, why you're investing your time and energy in the project. Thank you, Bibi.
I'll go first. I'm investing my time and energy into this project because I think that libraries really can change the world. I think that what we do is we give information and put it out there, and that sparks, innovation and just brilliant ideas. It can spark revolution, and I'm hoping that this is one of those things. This is one of those projects that will help save the world. I think it could. That's why I'm inspired by this project.
Can I plus one what April just said? And then just add the fact that, like, as I sit through this last hour and see all the comments in chat, I'm just blown away by all these amazing ideas you're already doing. So I just can't wait to see what comes of it.
Juan, do you want to go next? I didn't, we both unmuted.
So I maybe just what Beth and April said, I think it will be, I love spending time in providing advice to bring libraries together to think about climate change and the environment. And yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I hope I can continue helping in shaping the ideas in whatever I can.
And I will say thank you to all of you, because this is the project that helps me stay sane. I am very disturbed by what's happening on a lot of fronts, but working on this project, I'm like, okay, this is purposeful, it's real, it's on the ground, and together we're going to affect thousands and thousands of people, literally. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Please look for an email with our chat archive. So many wonderful contributions in the chat. A link to this archived session and a link to a survey. If not this afternoon, we'll get it out to you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.